The U.S. military is shooting down another high-flying object.
Sentinel,
He's doing
North
God's work.
Sentinel.
The island was off limits to protect outsiders.
UFOs, uncontacted tribes, British colonialism, and something called the Great Filter.
Unidentified objects are discovered over U.S. and Canadian airspace. An American man was believed to have been killed.
This is the Great Filter.
What do all these random topics have to do with each other? Well, perhaps the answer to whether or not we are destined to become an interstellar species or bound to Earth for the rest of our existence. To explain how, we need to start with this island. It is Sentinel Island. On it reside a people who are living in the Stone Age in 2025. Now, let's talk a little bit more about said Sentinel Island, and specifically how that uncontacted tribe got there in the first place. So the year is somewhere around 24,000 BC, and this is the Bay of Bengal. These are the Andaman Islands. A few nautical miles west of them is North Sentinel Island. At this time, global sea levels are significantly lower than they are today, thanks to something called the glacial maximum. This resulted in a land bridge connecting Myanmar to the chain of islands, effectively allowing Paleolithic era hunter-gatherer tribes to migrate to the island by simply walking on over. However, as time went on, the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, meaning the hunter-gatherer tribes who migrated to the islands were trapped, and as far as we know, they have remained there, uncontacted for nearly 26,000 years. This means the tribes remained hunter-gatherers with no knowledge of anything outside of the islands, whether it be the rise and fall of Rome or the invention of gunpowder. That is until 1789, when, you guessed it, the British stumbled across these islands. And with them came the knowledge that the rest of the world exists. Now, the British decided to use the islands to create a difficult to escape from penal colony, similar to Alcatraz except British. Over time, that penal colony turned into Port Blair and gained around 148,000 inhabitants, along with the Indian Navy, where they had a large naval base. You're probably thinking I'm telling the history of an uncontacted tribe, and these islands all sound very contacted. And you're right, the islands were made up of dozens of different tribes, most of which were annihilated by the many diseases carried by the British to the islands. That is excluding the Sentinelese, who were largely left uncontacted thanks to their geographic distance from the rest of the islands and the lack of strategic importance. However, in 1867, a merchant ship that belonged to, drumroll please, the British, wrecked onto the North Sentinel Island with 106 British and Indian crew on board. The crew waited on the island for rescue, but 3 days into their wait, they reported a group of islanders emerging from the jungle and attacking them. Thanks to the amount of shipwrecked sailors, they were able to fight off the islanders until they got rescued by the British Navy. But this event marks the first recorded contact with the North Sentinelese. Then, in 1880, a 19-year-old British aristocrat who was the head of the chain of islands decided it would be a great idea to make a trip over to the North Sentinelese. There, he kidnapped 6 of its inhabitants, took them back to Port Blair, 2 of which died of disease. He gave the other 4 presents and sent them back to the island. That, in combination with the shipwreck incident, likely led the islanders to view any and all outsiders as a threat to their very existence. This can be seen through aggression towards later visitors, like an Indian convict who escaped prison on a makeshift raft in 1896 that drifted to the North Sentinel Island, where a few days later, a British search party found him dead on the beach. Then, fast forwarding to World War II, the Japanese may have committed some atrocities on the island, but we will likely never know thanks to their destruction of records when the Second World War was coming to an end. Then, in 1947, India became independent and were granted ownership of the Andaman Islands. In 1956, thanks to a combination of language barriers, the North Sentinelese aggression, and concerns regarding disease, the Indian government decided it would be best to prohibit travel within 3 nautical miles of the island. However, since then, there has been some academic trips to the island where people have given the islanders gifts like pots and pans or coconuts, and they filmed some of it. In 1977 and 1981, 2 cargo ships ran aground on the island, but both crews were rescued by helicopters, something that must have been like seeing a UFO to the islanders. Both ships were left there, and the islanders went on board the ships and even scavenged them for iron, effectively launching the islanders into the Iron Age. Imagine exploring a wrecked cargo ship using a torch when you're in the Stone Age. Must have been a truly surreal experience. Maybe that's how Bob Lazar felt. Then in 2006, there was an incident with 2 Indian fishermen who ended up being killed by the islanders, and their bodies gruesomely put on display on the beach. And in 2018, an American missionary was killed by the islanders. And that is the history of the Sentinelese. Forgive me for having to summarize the fascinating history of this chain of islands, but for the sake of the video, I wasn't able to go into as much depth as Real Life Lore did in their video, where they thoroughly covered the history of the island. Now, have you ever heard of the Great Filter? It is a resolution to the Fermi paradox. Essentially, with the incomprehensible age of the universe, along with the amount of Earth-like planets that exist, it is almost certain that there should be an intelligent alien species that has been around for millions of years, much more advanced than ours. But as far as we know, that is not the case. Meaning there is a challenge or danger that is so hard to overcome, it eliminates any and all species that encounter it, explaining why we haven't come across an interstellar species of aliens. And we could have either already overcome it, meaning we are one of the luckiest species in history, or we have yet to encounter it and it will likely result in our annihilation. Unbeknownst to the Sentinelese, since 1956, the Indian government has been guarding them from any outside contact. Now, while they haven't done a perfect job of protecting them from any contact, they have still kept the islanders from any large outside force making any kind of groundbreaking contact with the island. As Eric Weinstein put it in JRE number 1945, when we study something, we typically assume we are smarter than it.
And in the doubly scientific method, you have to assume that whatever is studying you is hiding from you the way you are hiding from your subjects. And they might be able to use multiple dimensions of time. They might be able to cloak themselves and disguise themselves.
So, theoretically, if there were aliens studying us, whether it be through some kind of microscopic craft or the use of another dimension we are not yet aware of, wouldn't they be doing the same? Now, let's go back to that island. Imagine if we were able to safely take one of the Sentinelese off and show them the Cybertruck. Trying to wrap their minds around such a foreign concept would be a very challenging task. Now, most of us using modern technology around the world would likely have a similar reaction if aliens were to try to show us their theoretically hyper-advanced technology. But what resonated with me most was the way he modeled how similar we could be to them. Allow me to explain. Despite the North Sentinelese having no knowledge of it, they are claimed by India and internationally recognized as being owned by India. Thanks to India's strict laws that pertain to the island, no one is allowed to visit, make physical contact with, or communicate with the natives, meaning India is serving as their quote-unquote great filter, without the natives knowing. Now, if the natives start to figure out how to use gunpowder to create a musket, it could certainly capture the attention of the Indian government. And if they progressed from that musket to a machine gun, the Indian government might eventually step in as the weapons got more advanced, right? So as to prevent them from annihilating each other or damaging passing vessels. Now think of that same scenario, but replace the North Sentinelese with all of Earth, and the Indian government with some sort of galactic empire, and that machine gun with a nuke. Maybe the aliens are realizing it's time to step in, and perhaps that explains all the UFO sightings, or it could be like the fisherman and the American missionary. All the UFO sightings are just aliens who are really curious about this quote-unquote uncontacted species on Earth and snuck by their government to see us. And we had a similar reaction to the North Sentinelese, but instead of using bows and arrows, we used F-16s with advanced air defense systems. This would also explain why there hasn't been a reaction by the aliens if we really have been shooting down their spaceships. The galactic government could hypothetically be giving us immunity like the Indians have done with the islanders for killing the people who visited their island. This theory supports the Great Filter theory, but rather than there being some sort of obstacle that is preventing species from becoming interstellar, it's just a government trying to prevent outside intervention. And as terrifying as the thought of aliens may be, I find the thought of a species preventing others from contacting us a far more comforting idea than the idea that space is a completely cold, dead vacuum where some unknown obstacle makes becoming an interstellar species impossible. Just imagine sitting down with a Sentinelese and trying to explain to them that you are watching a video using an electronic device that's connected to the internet on a video sharing website that explains how their existence and their relationship to India, a country they unknowingly belong to, could theoretically be an example of Earth's relationship to some sort of galactic empire and help us answer some of our most burning questions, like, are we alone?